So humbleness, not arrogance. The Malaika alayhim salam, when they lay themselves prostrate to the human being, it is on account of the haqiqah of the human being, the essential reality of the human being, not the external reality of the human being. Iblis, however, the devil, as you know, saw in Adam, in the human being, only the bashariyah of the human being, the external bishra of the human being, the external skin, the external composition of the human being, and said to God, when he ordered the creatures to lay themselves prostrate to Adam, said, "No, I do not. خلقتني من نار وخلقته من طين." That's all he saw. He saw the external realities. You created me, O God, of fire, and you created him of clay. That's all he is. He's clay. And I am fire. Like fire burns clay. Fire is superior to clay. Must have he argued. And thus he saw only the external bashariyah of the human being. He was not able to see in the deep, beautiful characteristics and values that the divine God subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah, instilled in the human being and beautified and adored the human being with. He was unable to look at that. And therefore you and I, as human beings, if we look at each other, if we look at other creatures, other human beings, simply the way they are externally, positive or negative, we are in a sense replaying the scene of Shaitan. And some of us are deprived of spiritual insight and spiritual eyesight to see the beauty underlying the human being. And thus we behave towards them simply on account of what we see outside. Rasulullah said, رُبَّ أَشْعَثَ أَغْبَرَ رُبَّ أَشْعَثَ أَغْبَرَ. Eventually he says, possibly sometimes a person who looks terrible, dusty, uncombed hair, does not look externally attractive at all, repulsive, doesn't mean dirty, just the way he is. أَشْعَثَ أَغْبَرَ. That people, when he comes to their doors, they kick them away. They pay no attention to them. They have no honor in their sight. They do not respect them. If he were لو أقسم على الله لأبره, if he were to demand from God, لو أقسم, by oath, demand from Allah Azza wa Jalla something, God will give it to him. Ready? Nobody demands from God. Everybody solicits from God. But God says, which He allowed, some of His ibad who look externally insignificant, if they were to demand from God and to require from God, He would give them. He would accept that. Why? Internally, they are so special. Internally, they are so beautiful. Their soul, their ruh, their spirit, their qalb, their heart is very special. But most people don't know that, don't see that, because most of us, most of our qulub, most of our insights and eyes, internal eyesights are clouded and obscured and blinded by so many things that we do in our lives that would prevent us from seeing the internal beauty of those whom God knows are beautiful. Sidi Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, rahimahullah ta'ala, sometimes puts this meaning in the following metaphor. You know, he says, not everybody is allowed to see those people and to recognize them. The metaphor he gives is, in those days, consistent with the cultures of those days. You know, the king and the princess and the daughter of the queen and the king. He says, who is allowed to see the daughter of the king? Anybody? No. It's only the very special friends to the king, who holds them very dear, that may be allowed to take a look at the princess. He says, the special abd of Allah Azza wa Jal is like that princess. Not everyone has the privilege and the honor of seeing them, meaning with their hearts, and recognizing them, and seeing their internal beauty. And some of us are subjected to the tests of external realities, to select from amongst us who are worthy of being exposed to the eternal realities. Are you with me? Subhanallah. So Iblis saw only the external reality of Adam and would not show reverence and respect to Adam alayhi salam. And by the way, Iblis, la'natullahi alayhi, having rejected the command of Allah Azza wa Jal, did he know that God existed? Or did he not? He quote unquote, he was there. I mean, there is in inverted commas, of course. In inverted commas, please understand that. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he was there, so he knows. That teaches you and me what? Knowledge is not enough. Knowledge is necessary, but not sufficient. Knowledge is not enough. Some of us, on account of knowledge, we become arrogant and deluded. And that is reenacting the scene of Shaitan in the early genesis of man. Those of us who know, and may know a lot, but are arrogant and deluded. And many of us, the more we know, the more we are arrogant and deluded. And that's a characteristic of Shaitan. That tells me that a nafs like that, and if my nafs is like that, we call that a shaitani nafs. This is a character of a nafs, of a person's internal reality that is devil-like, shaitan-like when we have it at that. So Shaitan knew. Number two, God commands him. That's what? That's an explicit command of God. That's like the text. There is a command that is textual, explicit, unambiguous, clear. Are you with me? Those of you who know some usul al-fiqh. What did Shaitan do in the presence of such an explicit, unambiguous, unequivocal text? Argue. And his argument was what? What he seemed to him logical reasoning. Some sort of qiyas. Analogical reasoning. You see, I am fire, he is clay. Fire is superior than clay. God, and you created me. Maybe he even would have argued implicit in that, I should lay myself prostrate to no one except to you. This is even very interesting, isn't it? isn't it? In the presence of what? Of an explicit command. By God, unequivocal, unambiguous. That's why it is said Shaitan, well, amongst the scholars of Islamic jurisprudence, Shaitan is the first one who used qiyas. First one who used analogical reasoning, of course in the negative sense, in the improper sense. Because why? There should be, as consensus amongst all the jurists, there should be no recourse to analogical reasoning in the presence of an explicit text. You have recourse to analogical reasoning, possibly in the absence of an explicit textual evidence. What did Shaitan do? In the presence of the text, explicitly used instead his own arguments that seemed to him logical, that seemed to him reasonable. And that's the great lesson for your soul and mind, for your intellect and mind as well. For no soul shall rise to high spiritual stations while the intellect is allowed to roam in the base, low confines of the nafs. Are you with me? Spiritual growth goes along with a proper intellectual growth as well. Proper intellectual growth. For if a person intellectually is like Shaitan, knows a lot, but argues in ways that seem to be logical and reasonable, in the presence of an explicit text, which is the origin of what is reasonable and what is intellectual, then that's a sign of intellectual mediocrity and of spiritual lowliness. Let us be very, very careful, my dear sisters and brothers, lest sometimes our IQ, if we have an IQ of 3.9 or 4.0 or 3.7 or kada, lest our IQ will lead us to a shaitani attitude. You can have a very high IQ, but as we sometimes say, very low. See if those of you remember, very low SQ, right? Spiritual quotient. Spiritual quotient, intellectual quotient. They call it social intelligence. Yeah, but there is more than that. There is the ruhani maqam. There is the spiritual level and acuteness and awareness, which is very, very important.